Are you enjoying this podcast? Well, you have KUOW members to thank for that. KUOW members make the trusted local journalism and storytelling you hear on this show possible. Become a member today and help support the production of this podcast. It only takes a minute. Make a donation at KUOW.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thanks.
Hey, KUOW politics reporter Scott Greenstone here. Feeling kind of overwhelmed by everything happening in local and national politics? Me too. Luckily, KUOW is hard at work bringing you the most important stories and conversations shaping our region and our democracy. Like Sound Politics, a new local podcast I co-host with Libby Dankman, and KUOW's partnership with A Braver Way, a podcast to help you face this divisive election year without losing heart. Hosted by Monica Guzman. Learn more at KUOW.org/elections.
You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. At this point, most of Washington's primary election results have been called. Bob Ferguson will face Dave Reichert in the race for governor. Tanya and Alexis Rinck will vie for a spot on the Seattle City Council. Goodspaceguy, once again, failed to get on the November ballot. But in one race, the drama has remained at a fever pitch as votes trickle in. Nearly 2 million people cast ballots, but in the end, just 51 votes separated second and third place in the race to be Public Lands Commissioner of Washington State. And the fun is not over yet. Northwest News Network state government reporter Jeanie Lindsay has been following this story, and she joins me now. Hey, Jeanie.
Hello.
So catch us up. How did we end up with just a 51 vote difference in this race?
It has been a nail biter, Libby. It has been wild. A couple of things brought us to this point. So there were a lot of people in this race, 7 of them total, 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So on the Republican side, one candidate, Sue Keil-Peterson, the third place person at this point, she had the backing of the state Republican Party. She's run for this office before in 2020 when she challenged current Public Lands Commissioner Hillary Franz. So Peterson's name isn't totally new, and that support from the party was really beneficial to her campaign this year. And then also on the Republican side, you have former Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler. She has really good name recognition, obviously from her time in Congress, but she isn't a party favorite. I think a lot of Republicans are still upset with her for voting to impeach Trump after the January 6th Capitol uprising situation that happened. And Herrera Beutler, actually spoke at the state Republican convention earlier this year, and people were standing up to turn their backs to her as she spoke. But she's still popular, obviously, and especially with more moderate Republicans, people more middle of the road. So that's why we see her in this race in first place, getting a majority of the votes. Clearly, she's popular and has supporters. Now, on the Democrat side, there were 5 Democrats, and the party didn't really coalesce around any one of them. The party didn't throw its weight into this race. It kind of just left candidates to do what they were going to do. So there were competing endorsements from local groups. Patrick DePoe, who currently works in DNR and has the support of current Lands Commissioner Hillary Franz, he got the Seattle Times endorsement, but Dave Upthegrove, the second highest vote getter at this point, was endorsed by conservation groups and a lot of others around the state, and a lot of local Democrat parties supported him.
The Stranger supported him, yeah.
Right. The Stranger supported him. So, and he has been in the legislature before, so he has good name recognition. Another Democrat in the race, Kevin VanDeWeghe, is currently in the legislature. He's going to be leaving after his current term ends. So there were just a lot of really qualified candidates in this mix. And on both sides, on the Democrat and Republican side, there was no singular candidate that sort of emerged. Everybody was sort of split up all over the place.
Yeah, they crowded each other out. There was nobody to winnow that field down and focus the left-leaning votes. So how unusual is this, Jeanie? I mean, does it remind you of any other close races in Washington's history?
I mean, yeah, I wasn't here or old enough to be a reporter at the time, but in 2004, the race for governor between Christine Gregoire and Dino Rossi, that race got national attention for being one of the closest elections in the history of the United States. There were multiple recounts, a lawsuit, a couple of rulings from the court, and Gregoire won that race after a lot of back and forth by around 130 votes. But that was in a general election. And when I was talking with the Secretary of State's office about this primary lands commissioner race, I was told that the last time we had a statewide recount in a primary was back in the 60s. So this has not happened in a primary in a while.
Yeah, that Dino Rossi, Chris Gregoire race, I was in college when the actual race, the campaign happened and the election, but years later, they were still going through lawsuits over that. And so my start to my news career was still covering that race. So yeah, I have a lot of history with it in Washington State. Jeanie, you reached out to both of these candidates, so Sue Keil-Peterson and Dave Upthegrove. What differentiates them in terms of what they would do in office?
Yeah, obviously, this is a critical question since elections result in policy consequences, if you will. So I think a key difference that I've found between Peterson and Upthegrove, as I was talking with them just yesterday, is that, they have different philosophies around trees and forest management in Washington. Obviously, the lands commissioner job is to manage state lands, which includes millions of acres of forests, et cetera. And so talking with Peterson, she's really concerned about the density of forests across Washington, managing those so that they do not, turn into massive fires where there's a lot of fuel for the fires because the forests have just gone unmanaged. So she's talked a lot about making them work, thinning them out, using that lumber in the economy, because lumber industry in Washington has been, intertwined with various funding for state government, land trust, things like that. So she's really talking about thinning these forests out so that they're not as prone to wildfire risks, and then using those, that lumber for jobs and to stimulate the economy. Meanwhile, Upthegrove is more of the climate candidate. I mean, he's backed by conservation groups, so he definitely has been talking about managing the forests, but he's doing it in a more climate-oriented way. And when I talk to him, it's about preserving forests and preserving a lot of, the trees that we have around the state, in addition to doing all of these other aspects of the public lands job, which brings in salmon and, waterways, agriculture, all of these different intersections. But he's really, I think, more of the conservation climate guy.
Mm-hmm. And Dave Upthegrove told you that a situation like this election, where Democrats bring in the majority of votes but almost get left off the November ballot, it actually, for him, reveals flaws in our top two primary system. And he's not the only one right now who think the state's election system needs another look, right?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. It was a question that had come up in my mind as I think about our election system, especially as people talk about stuff like ranked choice voting. But yeah, he said that, Washington voters in the primary, 57% of the people who cast a vote in the lands commissioner race voted for a Democrat. And yet they were 51 votes away from not having a Democrat on the general election ballot in this race. So he was saying that the legislature should probably look at that and see how they might change it. He didn't, talk about ranked choice voting. He didn't really endorse any single idea. He said he didn't know enough about what could work and what options there are. But, he said that something needs to change. And then when you talk to Republicans, I've, heard this come from the chair of the Republican Party, State Representative Jim Walsh, and he talks about needing to go to a more traditional primary system where, there are parties that are doing the nominating and that, it's not just an open system where, you can look at the governor's race and have 28 candidates, So he's saying that it's a little chaotic and there needs to be something to make it less so.
Sure, the parties want more power, right? So they would like to go back to the party system. I mean, the idea of this was, and we only changed from that system in 2008. That was the first time we had a top two primary. So it's not been that long that we've had this system. And, people who advocate for it and went to court, by the way, to defend it, say that it's supposed to be helping bring in more moderate candidates to, have them emerge from the primary election. Now, if you look at how moderates did in this primary election, Jeanie, I don't think it's working like the way that those advocates have been hoping for. So it's interesting to me that people are saying they want to take another look. Again, it hasn't been that long since we changed over.
Yeah, certainly with elections happening at a state level, only every few years, there's not been a lot of time to see this play out. But yeah, it is really interesting, especially as, you go, I've been to a couple of different events through this election season and seeing people who are talking about ranked choice voting. They're trying to address exactly this question of what is the best way to elect people so that, even if folks are not getting their number one choice, they can still potentially see themselves supporting a candidate that, might make it through because there's somebody else's number one choice. So, certainly something I'm going to be curious to talk more about after we get past this election, because the election system's not changing before we get to November.
Jeanie, you've been talking to Up the Grove and Kiel-Peterson. How have these candidates been filling their time while they're waiting for final results?
Yeah, just as they have different philosophies around how to manage the state's lands, they also took very different approaches after, the results started trickling in on election night. So Peterson, when I talked with her, she kind of washed her hands of it while waiting for the results. And this is what she told me when we talked.
August 7th, we got preliminary results, and I was ahead at that time, and I prayed to God to just take over from there. That's what I did. And I told my campaign manager, that's what I want. And he can just call me whenever he wanted to tell me any results. So basically, I got my laundry done. I worked in my yard.
Wow, it's so laid back.
Yes, like after the election, she just kind of said, whatever happens, happens. And I mean, to be fair, she probably thought it was going to be over a lot faster than what it's turned out to be. But I did think it was really interesting. And that contrasts pretty intensely with Up the Grove. Meanwhile, he was going really hard at curing ballots. That's essentially following up with people who had their ballots challenged for things like missing a signature or having a signature that didn't match the one on file, stuff like that. And so his campaign, was making sure that those voters who had their ballots challenged had the chance to fix their ballot and have their vote count before the certification deadline. And here's what he told me about that effort.
We focused on making sure every vote got counted, particularly those that we think maybe voted for me. So I didn't have much time to personally think about it because we were so focused on getting the work done. It also was inspirational. We had, I think, more than 600 people sign up to help us knock on doors and make phone calls, and so many that we didn't even get all of them plugged in.
Yeah, there's been an all-out effort from the Up the Grove campaign. You cannot target just Up the Grove voters, for example, or Kiel-Peterson voters with those curing efforts, but you can go to zip codes that are more likely to have, like in King County, more likely to have Up the Grove votes in them. Jeanie, I am imagining the Republican in this race who got first place, Jamie Herrera Butler, almost wanting to go out and cure Sue Kiel-Peterson ballots herself, because if she has to face a Democrat in Up the Grove in this general election, that's going to be a lot harder to actually win this office. Now, this isn't over. What happens next in this process, Jeanie?
Yeah, so the state officials will certify the results and then they will call the recount. The recount could take days or a week. We don't really know, but there will be a timeline. Officials have been asking counties what that should look like, what honestly is feasible at this point, and then they'll set a deadline to get this done. And that deadline is pretty critical, I will say, because this is happening in a primary, and the state has to mail November ballots to military members or voters overseas in less than a month. So election workers will be trying to finish this recount effort as quickly as possible because ballots need to be finalized in time to meet that quickly approaching deadline for the general election.
All right. Who knew the state lands commissioner race would be the hot race of the primary? And we are still watching. Jeanie Lindsay, state government reporter for the Northwest News Network. Thank you so much for following up and bringing us this reporting, Jeanie. It's been great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.
Hi there, I'm Monica Guzman, host of A Braver Way podcast and your guide across the political divide. Are you done with the divisiveness in our politics and ready to do something about it? This season, we've partnered with KUOW to reach more listeners like you. Join me as I sit down with guests from across the political spectrum. Together, we'll share tools, insights, and messy, real-life stories to help you face this election year without losing heart. Listen to A Braver Way now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.